Hello and welcome to Emsi webinars. We're so happy to have you with us today. It's a very exciting webinar today. We have over 500 people registered for this webinar, so I hope you find it useful and very informative. We have with us today Andy Derman, who's the Managing Director of Emsi UK, and also Kelly Bailey, who is the Director of Emsi Open Skills. So we are going to have an opportunity, hopefully, for questions. So if you put them in the box on the control panel as we go through, and hopefully we get back to those at the end. If not, then we will email you independently at the end afterwards. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Andy. Good afternoon, Andy.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone to this latest webinar, coming to you from Emsi UK HQ here in Basingstoke, and we have an international guest in Kelly Bailey, who runs our skills open skills project from the US, based out in New Jersey.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Kelly. Kelly's very smiley and happy. Thank you very much for joining. I did try and get my ugly mug onto this webinar, but I'm having privacy settings issues with sharing my webcam, which is obviously devastating news for the rest of you. But for those who've met me, congratulations, you've dodged that bullet. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you so much for joining us for this really interesting and exciting webinar. Looking forward to working through this stuff with you. So yes, in terms of the goal for this session, it's really our chance to tell you about Emsi Skills. It's a very exciting project we're pushing on globally, and some of you may have come across some of the content we've been producing out in the US, and I wanted to take the opportunity to start to bring some of that thinking and learning and understanding to the work we're doing here in the UK and beyond. So the goal of today's webinar very much is to introduce to you why we're doing what we're doing with Emsi Skills and what it is, so we can lay a foundation of understanding, and hopefully then we will have a series of content and activities progressing from this point that'll start to dive into the finer details of all of that. So just before getting into the meat of all of that, for any new viewers to the Emsi webinar series, just a quick moment to introduce us as an organization. And it's quite simple, really. We care about helping individuals make better decisions, more informed decisions about the labour market. And we see that there's a critical role for good, detailed, robust, insightful data for a whole range of organizations to have at their disposal to be able to make better and more informed decisions relating to the economy they're supporting, whether that be in localities or particular industries or occupational areas. And we want to bring to you a whole wide range of helpful, interconnected data and insightful data to help with today's challenges. And there are plenty of challenges in the labour market right now. And we do this by bringing data to the worlds of education and skills, economic development and regional planning, and the world of employment. So as we think about how can data play a big role in supporting that decision making, we want to look to the great challenges that are facing our labour market, not just right here, right now, under the COVID cloud, but actually the fact is the labour market is becoming ever more complex, and the need for good insight and data-driven decision making is becoming ever more important. And so it's at this point I'd like to hand over to Kelly. Kelly is the brainchild behind our skills project globally, and has been working in this arena for many years, very passionate about solving some of the great challenges. So Kelly, I'd like to hand over to you and invite you to sort of, I suppose, set the scene really, and just tell us a little bit about what the challenge is as you see it in the labour market, and then we'll come on to talk about the Emsi Skills project in more detail from there.
Happy to, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just so that you all know a little bit of where I'm coming from and chatting about this, I've actually worked with 3 labour market analytics firms, and I've been working with skills data on a globally for about 17 years now. But I did want to say hi on video before so you knew who was behind the scenes here, but I'm going to stop that share so that you can pay attention to the slides. So this is a great sort of first cursor here. Here in the US, Josh Furson runs the HR work for Deloitte. I know you all might be familiar with that organization, and he really focuses on sort of innovations around how we deal with hiring and learning and development across the board. So this is just a great quote to really set the stage in terms of like how quickly the job market is changing and how the systems that we currently have had in place for such a long time now are really not allowing us to drive change in terms of the ways that people are and companies are looking at hiring folks, and also how they're going through learning throughout their life. If you wouldn't mind going to that next slide, Andy.
Yeah, just on that point, I mean, in terms of some of the background, I mean, there's some imagery there on the screen. When you say about this kind of fast pace and changing, how is it manifesting in your view? What are the, I suppose, where are the focal points for that as we look to the challenges in the labour market right now?
Sure. Well, I think it's a really great job with the pictures here because, you know, with jobs changing so often, skills coming in, you know, I know we've all have heard a lot about automation, hence the beautiful robots here on the picture, but the concept that, you know, there are portions of jobs right now today and over the years that will become more automated. Also, of course, we've got a lot of people throughout their life, especially students, that are just not sure, like when they go through school, what are the next steps for them? How do I navigate, you know, without understanding the skills that they learn and the skills that they're building through their jobs? It's really difficult to make those types of decisions. Of course, in terms of skill gaps, you know, that's been a true real thing. A lot of times when you don't have visibility into what types of skills you're hiring, what types of skills you might be building, it's difficult to see and make a decision on what other skills you might need to learn to move forward. And then, of course, lastly, as we are all experiencing right now, the situation with COVID, I mean, that has really, in all honesty, just lit a fire under what has been going on for so many years. You know, this sort of like broken system, if you will, the broken understanding of essentially everything to do with our ecosystem around hiring and learning.
Yeah, very interesting, and obviously the COVID component is at front and center of all of our lives right now globally, and it really is shining a light. I think what it is obviously driving new ways of working, but actually as you think about the fourth industrial revolution and all of that, actually what we're seeing is just a new light being shone on the underlying challenges that have been there for some time, but now they're front and center in all of our lives, aren't they? So yeah, very interesting.
So, you know, really to kind of start off with how the world is really working and give you kind of an idea. I mean, I think we all know this, but sometimes we don't really think about this and why this system is broken. So in the real world, everyone, right, when you have a resume, CV, social media profile, if you have a LinkedIn profile, you know, we're talking about ourselves in terms of skills. Employers, when they post a job or when they're looking to fill a new role, of course, they are also talking about the skills of the people that they're trying to hire. And in education, right, they might not be doing maybe as clearly of a description on what skills they're teaching, but for the most part, they are teaching skills. And the world is working this way, but the data that is supporting the transitions through the cycle of people and learning and employers has not been working that way. Andy, if you could just show that next slide, I want to show you guys kind of the difference between the way the world is currently working, but underneath that, what's going on. It's really a game of telephone. And I say telephone meaning like when you used to tell your friends when you were young, you know, a certain sentence and it would go down the line and it would be confused at the end. There really is sort of this miscommunication happening, you know, in terms of people and the way that they talk about themselves again in skills. The systems themselves talk about people in terms of SOC codes. Jobs, they have to align to SOC codes. And of course, in education, they have to align to the course names or the course codes. And when you're trying to make connections between those three areas, there's a lot of translation that has to happen. And of course, just in any case, you know, there are some times where that translation is not occurring sort of like X to X, if you will.
And talking
sorry, Andy, would you mind moving to the next slide? I don't want to keep saying that.
Talking of translation, that's what we call Chinese whispers here in the UK. So
yes, okay. Exactly. Oh, we lost your screen there, Andy.
Are we back?
There you are. Okay, perfect. So talking a little bit about the system, how it currently is, I want to kind of paint this picture for you. So on the left-hand side, the way that our system has worked is very much what we refer to as a taxonomical approach. Now, this is just an example of the ONET system within the US, but essentially it's the same in the UK as well, which is really like a top-down approach. Many, many years ago, our governments, you know, decided that, hey, we really need to help people make definitions of what's going on in the labor market. And of course, we're going to put together these categories, clearly define those categories. As time goes on, we create subcategories. The difficulty with this type of system is that it's very hard and very time consuming to maintain and update. So the way jobs are working right now, I love to use the example of a job like a software developer. A lot of times you might think that that's a job title per se. It is being used in some cases as a job title, but for the most part, it really surfaces as one of those occupation codes. So bear with me for 1 second here, but I'm going to use an example from Amazon. So Amazon has a job that is titled Software Developer 1. As it turns out, if you look at all of the job postings that they have across the world that are titled Software Developer 1, those jobs are actually not the same. When you look under the hood or peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, you're actually seeing in terms of the skills within that job that they have 7 different Software Developer 1 jobs. It's just that when we stick to the approach that we're so used to, that our structure has been so used to for so long, it's only allowing us to see that that is the same job. And with skills, that really allows us to say, hey, you know what, there is so much more variation in terms of what is available in jobs, in terms of what is available, what skills you have as a person, and what skills are really being taught through some of the learning that you're going throughout your life. When you only look at it in this sort of like categorized approach, that really top level category doesn't give you a lot of definition. And especially now, as we surfaced kind of as we jumped into this, was that, you know, as jobs are changing this often, you know, right, there's all these new skills, like whoever heard of R, right? I mean, that just came around recently. That wasn't always a technology, but technology is just moving so quickly now. These changes that are happening, like we need to stick on top of them, or we're not really going to understand what we need to do to be able to hire the right people, to be able to signal out to people what types of skills we need for them to take that role. And also, we're not going to keep our learning content up to speed. So I'm also going to paint the picture of sort of the future, if you will, and what we're doing here at Emsi, which we call the skill shape approach. So I tend to use the analogy in this particular case of a universe. So think of what you're seeing here as looking up at the stars in the sky, right? That's kind of how skills themselves. Skills are a little bit messy, okay? So they are just all these stars in the sky. When you look at skills, the reason, right, why it was so difficult for people to say, oh, let's really understand skills, you know, move away from this taxonomical approach, was because they're used to everything being very organized, where skills are just sort of like, you know, all over the place. Again, these stars in the sky. But when you look at skills in this new and different way, and what I would say is more organically, so just looking at the ways that skills present themselves in job postings, the way that people are talking about themselves in terms of skills on looking up at the stars in the sky, and you know where the Big Dipper is, and you can point out, that shape that we can do with skills. So take this back to yourself for a moment, right? You and I most likely have gone to different universities. We probably have different degrees. We may have also picked up additional learning across our career that looks very different. Most likely we have very different jobs, meaning the skills that I have versus the skills that you all have look very different. So when we look at this approach in terms of how each of us look on a very personal fashion, and this can encompass me as a person, you as a person, this can also encompass different types of jobs. They all have their own individual skill shape. This also includes learning content that all has their own individual skill shape. And it also includes different regions in our world that have very different regional skill shapes. And when you look at the sort of labor market in general on these skill shapes, you start to really see some amazing relationships. It's almost like puzzle pieces that you can fit together. So if my personal skill shape looks like this particular puzzle piece, and I'm interested in moving along in my career over here, I would then be able to pick the exact puzzle piece of learning that would fill that skill gap for me to move. And so creating those kinds of matches, when you again peel back the layers of that onion, it changes the whole way that a person can go through their life, the whole way that an organization can really look at talent development, hiring. It can really change the whole way that a school or a learning organization can determine like how to keep up to speed with what's changing.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Kelly. So it's a complex world with lots of stars in the sky, as you say. So what are we doing to, so there's one thing understanding the concept. The challenge, of course, is about creating a language and a consistency then in how we define these things. So tell us then about the Emsi skills, and particularly the Open Skills project, in terms of what we as an organization are doing to rise to this challenge.
Yes, I would love to. So the great thing about what we did, now we did all the hard work. I know in describing how skills works, it's definitely very complex. But what we realized was that all of these years, there have been different organizations that really approach skills in this very taxonomical fashion. Because early days, people just didn't want to go so far over. But now we've kind of come along. It's been quite some time now since skills first started coming about. Here at Emsi, again, we took this new, more organic approach, and then we realized, well, the only way for everyone to start speaking the same language is if we open that up to make it available to the world, so that if I was an organization, I can make sure that my job postings use the same skill language. If I'm a person, I really want to be able to connect back to employers, so I want to be using the same skill language. And if I'm an educator, I really want to be able to take my learning content and align it to that same skill language. So we decided, after doing all of this work for many years, creating, in this case, what we call a library, because of course we did not take that taxonomical approach. We created this library and we said, why don't we just go ahead and open source that library so everybody can use it? We can all start working on that same foundational layer.
Yeah, and we will certainly point you to finding out how you can dive into that in a moment. So what is a skill then? I suppose we use the term here, but what does it mean in Emsi skill library terms?
Yeah, so a skill is essentially a word. So, in the most common way to describe this, it's a word that we use to communicate value. And so anything can be, like Java could be a skill, right? That's a more technical skill. Communication could be a skill, but essentially it's a word that you would see, companies using in a job posting to describe what types of things they need that employee to have. People, again, using it on their resumes and social media profiles, you're going to see these skills that are surfacing. And of course, in education, It's specifically, we talk about a lot about outcomes in terms of education. It's really those skills that you're building that we're talking about. So the skill is actually a word.
And so we've obviously hinted towards the why behind skills, but let's just recap on some of those key points with that kind of definition in mind.
Let's definitely do that. So, you know, education has just changed. I'm sure that I'm not the first person that you've heard say this, right? Over the years, we don't just go and sit down for that first, you know, degree and we go through our life and that's just fine, right? Because we all know that even in our own careers, you know, we might have had the opportunity to sit down for that degree, but then we've had to pick up new skills as our jobs have changed, as we've moved along that path. And in the past, when this, education was sort of founded, it was very much everyone looked at it like a very linear path. You know, if you take this step, then you go to this step, then you go to this step, and you're like climbing your mountain, where in actuality, it doesn't look anything like that, right? We're sort of all over the place trying these new opportunities. We don't just go and work for the same company for 40 years anymore. We're not just, you know, going into accounting and taking along this path. We're sort of going all over the place. So skills is really allowing, again, going back to that concept, for us to see what real life looks like. And then of course, as I said, and then, you know, and it really is this foundational layer, because again, you know, those three circles that we started this off with, really that is the ecosystem when it comes to hiring and learning throughout your life. And that translation layer, or what I call sort of like the cement foundation of your house, right? This concept, this language being able to span the entire ecosystem is what really helps us make stronger connections as we move forward.
And I think what you know, as we reflect on this now, a lot of how the world really works does of course work at that level, but I think the challenge, as you have stated, and we've certainly started to communicate, is one of that common language in particular, and that drives intentionality. So we've long heard the value of higher and degree level education is not simply the connection between the course and the career, but the fact that we're building well-rounded citizens of the world who are highly employable, which is very well to say, but the challenge often is then defining what that actually means. And so having skill terms is a great way of actually starting to add some clarity to all of that, and intentionality, in much the way that hiring employers are often looking to clues in your employment history and education history to think about whether we have the right skills to fulfill what that employer is seeking. And again, I think that the challenge without a common language is one that, yeah, the world keeps turning, but it's turning inefficiently, and it really is a challenge to be inclusive as well. And so hopefully we can lower some of the barriers to people finding their right route through to fulfilling their potential, right?
Exactly. Inefficient is really, I mean, I'm like sticking to that word because that's really the way that it has been.
Yeah.
So
tell us about Emsi skills more specifically. What do we mean by Emsi skills? It's a skill term. What does that all mean?
Yep. So in our library of skills, again, this is open source, so it's freely available via API. We're about to go into where to access that, but I just wanted to mention that. So in the skill library itself, this is what you're going to find. You're going to find over 30,000 different skill words, skill terms, if you will. This is sourced from hundreds of millions of online job postings. Again, also from social media profiles and CVs. And I really want to make a point on that, because this is the first time that any sort of skill library has been developed looking at both supply and demand. So that really is a differentiating factor at the way we initially worked to pull this together. The other piece that we also did, going back to sort of these broken systems for a moment, was we also tagged each individual skill word with a uniquely identifiable machine readable tag. As most of you know, a lot of what happens in terms of the learning and hiring ecosystem is that there is a lot of online activity. There is a lot of AI, machines reading people's resumes or job postings, people applying online, that entire process. And what was one of the areas where we saw sort of this difficulty was that there was, although again, yes, there were skills taxonomies out there, there was never really any way to know that when you said X, it meant X. And we really felt very strongly that we wanted to make sure that we created this tagging. So again, the concept of a cement foundation, anytime you built upon that very strong common language, that very strong cement foundation, it was sound enough so that you would be successful. So those uniquely identifiable machine readable tags are really important. And then of course, this library is being updated every 2 weeks by our team. Again, a very important piece to what is offered here. It is, and only because I've done this for so many years, it is extremely manually intensive if you were to try to create anything like this. And so it is wonderful to be able to have a team that is making sure that what our machines are reading is really being kept up to date and that there's no sort of thing slipping through the cracks, if you will. And mentioning to our team. But then on the next slide, I'm just going to jump in a little bit deeper in terms of also some areas that you'll see within this skills library. So there's a few more pieces. So again, we mentioned that we are using these unique skill identifiers that are being, actually it's difficult. The way I have this set up, I can't read all the words. There we are. So, we have these cycles where we're keeping this up to date. We do have a team that is reviewing what our tool, what our technology is reading from these job postings and social media profiles and CVs. We do also have an open API access, and we're obviously maintaining that. We never use the same unique skill identifier, but we also have old and new releases, depending on what you're using to build any products with or use within any of your various documents, that we've already discussed. Besides that uniquely identifiable machine readable tag, we also maintain 3 skill classifications. So we talk about soft skills. Again, these days we might call that human skills, 21st century skills. There's all different ways that you can describe that. But essentially we like to categorize that because again, depending on how you're using this, it's very helpful to be able to pull out sort of technical skills and just focus in on this one area. We also maintain hard skills. So that isn't only technical skills, although we tend to refer to it that way. Like financial analysis could be a hard skill. So I just want you to realize that yes, hard skills are not really what we would refer to as those common skills, but they're not always just, technology related skills or IT. And then also certifications. So anytime there's a recognizable standard within an industry or an education body, we're also maintaining that as a descriptor within this particular skills library. There's also another piece that when you access this particular API, you are receiving 50 free extractions of either a resume, a job posting, or a piece of learning content. And so that particular piece is really great. Obviously, if you're trying to curate a lot more of content, we can help, we can talk about that and help you with it. And then, there are some other areas that we're even working on. So, we are working on ability to surface related skills. So when we read a skill, let's say from a job posting that you input, we might want to be able to return back and tell you, not only what the job titles these might relate to, but also what other skills tend to surface with this skills. I'm just trying to give you a representation of what, the area that you're really focused on. Again, people are using this for so many different reasons. I know Andy's going to get into that in a bit more detail, but we try to really create a way that in a free fashion, you can use this to create your strong foundation for either your product or your organization.
And I think your point at the bottom that the no definitions is an interesting one that crops up.
Yes. I missed that.
Yeah, no, so it's something that I've certainly had some interesting conversations around. When we're used to coming from a world of taxonomical structures, as you had described earlier, often you can start to imply some degree of hierarchy or leveling and definition and all sorts, whereas we've taken quite the opposite view in kind of really just working out in those skill terms with that basic metadata in terms of how we might categorize them into those three classifications. But of course, when you, as you said earlier, when you're building that taxonomical approach, the ability to maintain it is, well, it's nigh impossible with the amount of effort and work and investment that needs to go in. This is why things like the SOC code system here in the UK, which, you know, 10 years down the line, everyone's bemoaning doesn't quite work for the system. At the time, it was okay, right? It degrades over time, but the Office for National Statistics are not updating that every 2 weeks to reflect the fact that the labour market is changing because it's so unwieldy. We've very much come to the other end of the scale, haven't we, where we're not trying to build too much complexity in. It's in effect a flat
Right.
structure, right?
Right. And the reason that we do that, I'll touch on that for one more second here, Andy, because this is actually quite important. I apologize that I missed it. So, you know, we don't define skills because the definition of that particular word can change over time, and it changes based on where it sits in relationship to other skills. So again, let's go back to that example of the software developer 1 job that I mentioned. When you see let's just use like IT skills under that particular job. When you see a certain grouping of IT skills, that can sort of mean one type of job. Now, if I take out, it's almost like reading sort of like out of context one word. So we really are looking at not like the word definition, but more the way that they group together and how that defines a role or a person or a region. We do include Wikipedia links to the actual definition of the word. So say you come across the word Java, you know, again, if you weren't sure what that word meant, we want to make sure you understand it. But again, we're not looking at that as being a true identifier of really anything. It's really the combination. And then also, you know, we look at that metadata in comparison as well, like a job title and sort of other pieces of information to really get a good read on how that skill, how best to define that skill.
Cool, thank you, Kelly. And as you'd mentioned, you know, the library itself is freely open to access via API, and so the website you can see listed here, and we will obviously be circulating slides and notes through, so we'll point you towards that. It's pretty simple and easy to sign up and access there and start to explore, isn't it?
It is.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. That's a fantastic, I suppose, background to the challenge, and I think probably the likelihood is that those of you who are joining us today are joining us because you are involved in that challenge in some way, shape or form. So hopefully we're just clarifying a lot of what you already know, but obviously a great chance for us to introduce actually our approach to this, and we're very excited by it, and it's proving to be highly valuable already in a number of activities. And I wanted to now just take this moment, having kind of established that background, is to really just kind of pick out some very, very basic examples. And if you follow the Emsi UK blog, you'll see we've started to kind of describe applications, and that's definitely something that we'll be focusing more and more so on. And encourage you to keep an eye on the Emsi Skills website, our global website. There's a lot more practical activities and examples coming through on a daily basis at the moment. But just wanted to take that original point about the challenge of helping ultimately individuals, educators and employers find their niche, find their sweet spot. And so just to kind of contextualize that a little bit more and just build on what Kelly was mentioning, I think from the people perspective, the great challenge here as an individual, you know, someone poses the question to you, hey, you know, what skills have you got? It's actually quite a difficult question to answer. You take a lot of the skills you have for granted. Again, that contextual piece is really quite critical, and often it's very difficult to see skills in yourself, whereas others can see the skills in you because they've got a relativity, a contextual component to that. So one of the great things, I think, from the people perspective, is really, as we start to build out that common language, is to be able to use our understanding of where we see skills, not just individually, but to a key point that you mentioned, Kelly, where we start to see skills coming together, clustering together commonly, is there's the ability to be able to start to map through the education you've undertaken, whether formal or informal, and that employment history that you've built up, to really start to build that personal skill shape. And once we have that personal skill shape, we start to articulate and define the skills that we have through various ways and means. That really is quite critical to guiding us towards where employer demand lay. And ultimately, it's about understanding, hey, how do I bring what I have, what assets I have, i.e. my skills, and how do I find where they can be deployed, whether that's in extending the career path and trajectory we're already in, on the industry we're in, or actually starting to think more generally about where else my skills are needed. And so the ability to not just map your own skill and build your own skill shape, but then start to map that to employer demand, of course, also helps us to understand what our personal skills gaps might be between where we stand right now and where we want to get to, or we think we can get to. And so quite critical in not just shaping how we target our next employment opportunity or develop that opportunity, but also start to think about where we invest in ourselves to help us move through to those great opportunities. And there's a great tool that we have that I want to point you towards, which is a tool called SkillsMatch, which we've launched. Now, this is, I suppose, a work in progress prototype, but it's a foundational tool that we're starting to productize a lot more now and tailor to very specific circumstances. But SkillsMatch, I'll give you a link later, is a tool where you can go in and you can actually start to plug in your employment and education background and start to build your own personal skill shapes. It's a great tool to start to actually think about what do skills mean in the real world, and what better place to bring it than to your own experiences and your own thinking. So it's a great way to get involved. So I'll give you a link to that one, but definitely a great tool to have a play with. I mean, the goal of that is to help then individuals identify where labour market opportunities lie. At the moment, SkillsMatch is actually founded in the US labour market, and so it'll talk to you a little bit about where the opportunities lie should you wish to head across the pond. But in terms of actually just understanding how skills align to your own personal experiences, it's a great little tool to have a play with, and I'd certainly encourage that one. From an educator's point of view, of course, on one strand, we're talking about how can an individual perhaps start to think about where they make investments in themselves. But of course, what we want to also do is raise educators up to preempt a lot of that, and to really start to think about how the education and the curriculum that they're building, whether that be under kind of your typical qualifications routes, or in more and more so in lifelong learning, CPD, those sorts of things, is really starting to think about our education offer in skill terms, and thinking about building out that education skill shape that we were talking about. So how do we really unpick a sense and define what it is we're building and capacity we're building in the skills context? And of course, again, we can make that connection, that non-linear connection, as we heard Kelly mentioning earlier, again, into employer demand by looking at the skill shape of different education offer, and map that into where demand lies. And of course, and definitely something we've been pressing on for a long time here in the UK, is also looking the other way back and actually starting to look to the labour market to see what are employers demanding and how can that really influence the education offer. Not just a case of what qualifications do we deliver, but really what sort of content do we need to be building to give our students the greatest opportunity to really be impactful and to fulfill our kind of key mission of helping individuals progress in life. And there's a good little tool, again, I want to point you towards, which is the skills extractor that we talk about. And on our Emsi Skills website, you can actually take course content and drop that into the skills extractor and actually start to see a qualification in skill terms. It works particularly well for apprenticeships, which are obviously built with employment in mind, and have strong descriptions on the Institute for Apprenticeship website. So I just picked an example here, aerospace engineer, pulled out the text content, dropped that into our skills extractor, and what you can start to see is the skill terms using the Emsi Skills library that we can start to pick out from how that curriculum is described. So now we're starting to very quickly build out a sense of that kind of transferable skill language within our existing content to see kind of the breadth of just what it is we're delivering, and we can start to map that into where there is demand in the labour market. And then the third dimension is thinking about it from an employer's perspective. So we talked about individuals, we've talked about educators, and really, and I apologise for the formatting on the screen, for some reason it's gone a bit wonky here, but really starting to think about how employers can be starting to think about the job role skill shape and their workforce skill shapes. So what is it you're actually seeking in your business? What are we looking to develop? How are we looking to define the skills and the talent that we require as a business as we look forward? How do we look to how others are defining, our competitors in the marketplace, for example, are defining that? And really then starting to be able to articulate more specifically what we're looking for in potential workers. How do we make sure that we attract the right candidates? So we, again, talking of efficiency, how do we make sure that the right people are applying for the right jobs based on their skill sets, their backgrounds, and their career trajectories? And so really that common linking language is quite critical. But also actually I think a big focus for a lot of our thinking, and Kelly, you might be able to talk a little bit to this, is also thinking about what skills we already have within our workforce. Do we truly understand the talent profile of our current workforce, let alone worry about trying to bring new talent into the business? And so I think there's a massive challenge.
And that particular visibility, I'll just add one thing to that, Andy, like that particular visibility saves quite a lot for organizations. There is a higher cost when you need to hire someone externally versus when you have visibility into someone internally that might just need a few additional skills to move into a role. Absolutely.
And to provide some examples, I mean, we've recently published, I was just thinking the last couple of days, Kelly, isn't it, an analysis of some of the top global corporations and the skills that they're seeking and how those skills are now starting to change, so we can start to see that. And actually in the kind of employer demand domain, well, the great thing is if you're an Emsi customer, if you have access to Emsi data through Analyst or the derivative tools there, well, we're already tagging all of our job postings data, all of our profile our professional profiles data with the Emsi Skills language. So you're probably actually using Emsi Skills maybe without realizing it. And here's some examples of just looking at Apple and what skills they're seeking and how that's been changing quarter by quarter to see kind of the nature of those skills. And that works at company level, but also I just ran an analysis. Data scientist is a cool topic, interesting to understand, but what do we mean by that? Well, based on 12 months of hiring activity here in the UK, we can start to see those key skills that employers are seeking when they go out to market for a data scientist. So you can see that mixture of hard technical skills as well as some of those key human skills and broader skills there. So now we can start to really build out a shape of that role Yes, it's constrained to data scientists as a descriptor, but what we can see is that kind of key skills that are coming through, and you'll find those skills clustering in other environments as well, where there are similarities and differences. So, that data is already there. You're probably already playing with it. We certainly are, and it really does illuminate what we mean by a particular role, a job, an occupation, because it's at this level that we make those connections. So yeah, those are just a few little examples. I just want to kind of whet your appetite, really, and I want to encourage you to have a play. I think there's a lot to be gained from just exposing skills, thinking about them from your own personal perspective, and we certainly would be excited to hear your thoughts and your queries around this, because we're learning a lot as we go as well. But just wanted to point you in the direction then of where you can kind of access some of these resources. So here are a few URLs. Say we will circulate slides and the recording, so don't feel like you need to write these down furiously right now. But the Emsi Skills website is a great start point, and actually you'll find that is the route to understanding the background to the skills, access the library and the skills extractor as well. So they're all available from there. So have a little play. It should be pretty straightforward to have a play with. The SkillsMatch solution I mentioned, there's a link there. Get yourself in. You can log in and set up your own profile and start building out your skills inventory and start to think about where it maps into the labour market. And I'd certainly encourage you to keep an eye on our blog here in the UK side. We'll be talking a lot more about skills over the coming months and years. Quite frankly, it's a really important part of where we're focusing our attentions. And so we'll continue to share examples and ideas and thoughts as we move forward and work with you guys in this arena. There is some work in progress underway that I think would be useful just to share with you. You may have seen that we have been chosen by Nesta as one of 20 finalists in a career tech challenge that they're running based on our work with Emsi Skills. And one of the concepts that we've referred to throughout is thinking about skill shapes and how skills cluster together. And part of the work we're doing with this Nesta challenge is really about bringing those clusters to life here in the UK. So we've done a lot of work in the US looking at the shape and nature of employment activity across the US, and we'll be adapting that very quickly over the coming months to the UK setting. So we'll start to see the sorts of skill shapes that we're seeing in the labour market, and it'll be really interesting, and it's going to be fascinating to us to see how similar or different they are to the US. But we do know from our work in the US, those skill shapes do vary geographically based on the nature of industry and business within localities. So it's going to be interesting to run that through, and that will certainly help supercharge the practical use of skills here in the UK. Kelly, do you want to say anything about skills clusters more specifically, just from your experience?
Sure. Well, I mean, when you say clusters, we've pretty much, our brand name for clusters are the skill shapes. So essentially, what I mentioned earlier in terms of every person has their own personalized skill shape based on their education history and job history. Every piece of learning content has their own personalized skill shape, right? The different skills that particular piece of learning content is teaching or training on. Every job has its own individual personalized skill shape, just like I gave that example with the 7 different software developer 1 jobs at Amazon. And every region has their different skill shape. And the easiest way to describe that is that it just depends on what companies and what the hiring activity looks like in that region, and also what the talent looks like in that region, which makes a difference. Here in New Jersey, in the New York metro area, we have a very distinct skill shape that looks, very different from not only other places in the US, but other places in the world as well, because of the way that our talent, our population, and our employers look like.
Great, thank you. And so yeah, a lot of that work being done here in the UK to replicate and explore that. So and it's really, you know, when you're faced with what more than 30,000 individual skills, that can be quite daunting. It's a big data set, right? So it's really quite critical, and that contextual piece that you mentioned earlier, quite critical to understand not just individual skills per se, but where they find themselves typically clustering together. Certainly that challenge of how do you define what skills you've got? Well, if we know what role you've done, we can start to actually recommend the skills that you're most likely to have based on other people that have done similar roles. And that's the skills clustering approach that really is driving that. So that's exciting, exciting stuff, and we'll share more as that comes to life. It's all about skills, baby. Kelly is actually on the verge of launching a new podcast that we wanted to point you towards. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Sure. Well, let's talk about skills, baby, of course. It'll be the first episode will be posted tomorrow. And really, you know, the idea around this particular podcast is to just talk to a lot of people that have been working on this for quite a long time. You know, a little personal side of like what skills that they think make them successful. Did they develop those skills through education or on the job? Very curious to hear these things. And also just sharing a lot of the innovations that are happening around skills-based hiring and learning. There's probably so many more, you know, worldwide, there's so many organizations, not only that I'm working with, but that I'm curious about. And I'd love to be able to bring that to everybody to really understand the lay of the land.
Great, exciting, looking forward to that. So keep an eye out for that one. Just want to point you towards the UK annual conference. You may have already signed up to our original plan of May, which got bumped for some reason, some kind of global pandemic or something, I don't know. Anyway, we're hopeful. We're very hopeful because we know the content is amazing. We've got some great speakers. We're very hopeful that we can reconvene later this year. So be sure to kind of put that into your diaries and sign up for that. Skills, of course, ever more going to be the core talking point that feeds into understanding how we better link talent supply and demand. And so we'll be talking a lot about skills come October there. I would also like to point you towards exciting new developments we've got for our FE, specifically for our further education market customers, as we continue to adapt and develop our tools to better align with kind of the typical FE workflows. We'll be launching our new analyst variant specifically for FE, and you'll see a lot of reference to skills there as we try and bring more of that skills thinking into the curriculum planning, employer engagement world. So I'd highly recommend if you're joining us from that world to check out the webinar next week. You can just head to our webinars page to sign up for that. And yeah, just want to say a big thank you for you joining us today. Really love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. And if you're grappling with some of the challenges, I'd recommend having a play with those resources, but please do share with us. We're keen to really hear the practical challenges of illuminating the labor market at a skills level, and we want to really come alongside you to support that through our free resources. We have a number of commercialized services as well to help add value to the work that you're already doing. So please do get in touch and do keep an eye on our Emsi blog for new webinars and new content that we'll be producing on the topic. And just as we bring this one to a close, just wondered if there are a number of questions, and I was just going to see if we can dig into any of those and see if we can open that up for some questions. Are you seeing anything in there, Kelly?
Let me see, and I'll come back up on video. But no, I don't know if I'm able to see the questions. I think, are those going into the chat? If you guys have any questions, please feel free to jump in there and throw them in the chat. Of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to Andy or I directly as well. Yeah. But we're here for the next 5 minutes, so.
Yeah, so interesting question here about the role of professional bodies in ensuring accredited degrees talk about skills. So do you have any experience in working in that environment, Kelly?
Definitely. So traditionally, most educators across the world just did not talk about, they weren't necessarily talking about skills, labor market skills, if you will, like skills that companies were interested in hiring for. And then on the other hand, the most difficult part around all of that was because the labor market, because jobs are changing so often, these educators were really having difficulty knowing which skills, do I need to keep focus on, which do I go upon? So, I think there are a number, not only does the skills language help you really understand and define, what terms, those words in the library you want to talk about within your particular, certification, what have you. But also there are some other resources that we're working on that, we're testing out in the US that we'll bring to the UK as well, around how to keep that finger on the pulse of what's going on so that you make sure your content that you're teaching is always up to speed. I know, Andy, you might already have, some resources that you might point to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're working with a number of professional bodies who I think are keen to not just illuminate the world in terms, and actually, quite frankly, are frustrated by SOC codes and SIT codes not quite representing them. And so really breaking the labor market down into smaller constituent pieces does allow us to think about how things connect back up together. So it's definitely a key area. And another question, so are we planning to link Emsi skills to existing skills frameworks such as ONET or ESCO?
Yep, we've already actually done that with ONET. So we are fully linked up through our tools here in the US. If you're searching, let's say you're interested in finding out what skills relate to, what occupation, that search is 100% available. We've made that linkage. Andy, I think you maybe can talk a little bit more about how that's linked over in the UK. Currently, it looks like it already was when you described it.
Yeah, so I suppose we're looking to different ways of defining the labor market and how they interrelate. So when you have such a granular building block as skills, you can see how skills cluster together to naturally coalesce around occupations, naturally coalesce around industry settings, naturally coalesce around different job titles as well. So largely almost letting the data do the hard work there. Now, obviously in ONET and ESCO and others, there are sort of static classifications, aren't there? So there are ways in which you can start to make those links. But I think the practical reality and why we're doing it the way that we are is, yes, we want to make that connection, but also we don't want to limit ourselves, as you say, by then being constrained by how things are defined. So so yeah, good stuff. Loads of questions, more than we can get through right now, but what we will try and do is distill those down. There are some common themes coming through, so maybe Kelly, you and I can take those away and come up with a bit of an FAQ to summarize some of those. So we'll publish those back. But thank you very much. Really good, some really good questions. I'm taking forever to scroll through all of them. So, and we are pretty much now out of time. So hopefully for those that we answered, great. Otherwise, we'll come back to you shortly. But thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate you joining us. You're very knowledgeable and you're passionate, and I know you've brought that passion to the work you're doing with Emsi, and we're excited to harness that. The world is a complex place now, and we need to bring this kind of illumination, in my view, to help not necessarily solve all the problems, but at least point us in the right direction more often than not. So we'll be sure to bring you back onto our screens down the line. You have a lot to give on this subject. Great.
Thank you.
So yes, stay safe, everyone. Stay well, stay sane. I was going to say enjoy the weather, but it's now broken and it's raining here in Basingstoke by the looks of it. So anyway, keep in touch, and a recording will be heading your way very soon. Thank you very much.